Materials supplied by Microsoft Corporation may be used for internal review, analysis, or research only. Any editing, reproduction, publication, rebroadcast, public showing, internet, or public display is forbidden and may violate copyright law.
Our next speaker may have mentioned once or 10 times what he's about to talk about. Please welcome Harper Reed.
Hello. So this is the second time I've built slides this way, and so if it fucks up and doesn't work, let me know. You'll notice, but it's written in Markdown, and then I use a script to generate a JavaScript presentation. It's really fun. It's called big.js is the technology, and then big.py generates it from Markdown. So let's hope it works. So hi everyone, my name is Harper, and I was a CTO for Obama for America, which is President Obama's re-election campaign. It was a really interesting choice to choose me as CTO. They really wanted a change, a departure from the past. In 2008, this was the CTO. And he's a really great guy. He's the one that hired me. He's who found me. And really, people always ask, how did you get the job? And it's really disappointing to just say networking. A friend of a friend who happened to be a Republican was just like, hey, this guy's looking for a CTO. And I was like, okay. That was it. This is me, obviously, and this is 2012. I don't know if you guys noticed the difference here. But Slaby always said he was trying to build this kind of like jock versus nerd dynamic in the office because we shared an office together. I didn't really appreciate that. So anyway, they basically just wanted to do things differently, and what they wanted to do is they wanted to win. That was the first thing. The second thing they wanted to do is they wanted to use real technology. So my wife, she's Japanese, and I was telling her this, and she told me this saying, which basically says, if you want rice cakes, go to the rice cake factory, or go to the rice cake guy. The idea is they needed engineers to do engineering. Before, they just hired whoever is around. And if you've ever been involved in a campaign, how many people here have been involved in a campaign? This is a big group. You know that it's really just like 100 24-year-olds, and they just they solve whatever problem you have them solve. Apparently, it doesn't really work for engineering as much. It worked fine in 2008, but we knew that we had a different game this cycle, where we needed to do things a little bit differently, and more importantly, we need to execute the hell out of it. So the first thing we did is this was actually, GitHub, which obviously you guys know of, creates these little guys, and one of our people photoshopped it and made him a little progressive. How cute! So we hired 40 engineers throughout the campaign. We hired them from all of these places. I want to really call attention to the last one, which is the real company I'm very excited about these days. Is it? God damn! It's Markdown. Tell you, it's the script. Just kidding. So overall, the campaign had about 120 tech staff. Now, let's go back to this 40 number because I forgot to say something. In 2008, we had 4. So this is back-end engineers. These are people who build the foundational technology. In 2008, they had 4 engineers for all of it. We had about 120 tech staff, including analytics and IT and all that fun stuff. Now, if you think about that, many of you work for giant companies, and 120 engineers is an incredible amount of engineers for any organization, except for all startups in the Bay, apparently. We had 18 months to do the job that we had to do. It was very daunting, but we relied on these things. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with The Simpsons. It's a really cool show. And Homer once spelled that out loud, SMRT, and I say that all the time. Anyway, so execution. But the thing was, we couldn't fuck it up. We had no chance. We had no, in technology, you often try and try again. You iterate. Your launches fail. How many have launched something and it didn't quite work out how you expected it? Now, if anyone doesn't raise your hand, you're lying, because launching never works. We had a unique property, though. We started from 0, and we had to build an enterprise, but we had a very limited time, and we couldn't fuck it up. So the first thing we set out to do is we built a platform. How many of you guys have heard of Narwhal? No, that's more maybe than should. But anyway, Narwhal is this really cool, I don't know, you guys recognize that guy? to Jim Messina, the campaign manager. We had a weekly presentation. We photoshopped his head on animals for every presentation, just as a way to kind of break it up and make it a little more humor. Anyway, Narwhal was a concept. It was something we came in there and we said, we need this platform to run the campaign. And what does this platform need to do? Well, it needs to be an API, because what an API will allow us to do is it allows us to share information all around, and it allows us the freedom to build all of these really important things very quickly. And so being able to, this is my favorite slide, by the way. This would be like a good, anyway. So then we built the products on top of that API. And so this allowed us to really build all of these very distinct products on one platform that then could share the data. So here is the innovation. Are you ready? When you logged into the call tool, you use the same username and password that you logged in with on BarackObama.com. And then on Van for Vote Builder, and then on all the BSD tools. That alone was the innovation that changed everything, a shared username and password. It was crazy. And so, that was really exciting, and that was only because we were able to share the data back and forth with this API. So here's the products we built. Call tool dashboard, the mobile apps, Contribute. There's a lot of others, but I actually don't think the innovation was the products we built. If there is an innovation, it was that the API was big, was wide, and covered all aspects of our technology. This is a little bit of a stat that kind of blows my mind still, is we had 290, roughly, a little under 300 repositories on GitHub that we regularly deployed. So that means that our staff of 40-ish engineers had to maintain that much code to be able to be successful. In the end, we had thousands and thousands of servers. This was a pretty crazy thing as well, but luckily we used Amazon Web Services, so we probably only hit 1,000 server for like 1 second, 1 day, one time. But we were able to scale infinitely, so if you guys are doing those things, use Amazon. Like I said before, failure was just not something that we could focus on. We just could not fail. And when you're kind of powered by ideology, it's pretty easy to kind of to adopt that attitude, but it's hard to adopt it in technology. So we had to do a lot of things. The first thing we did is we engaged heavily in user experience. So we knew that we would be very deliberate about the things we were building and how the users were interacting with them. I hired the first, I think, user experience professional in the history of campaigns. Jason Kunish, he was our director of user experience. He was great. The second thing we did is we did this thing called Game Day, which, it's funny I say day because it actually, we did dry runs too, we'll get that. We did a game day, which was this idea of practicing failure. So going through and killing all of your products, killing the technology that powered your products. And we did this for a month. So October, all we did was fuck ourselves. It was terrible. It was one of the most painful things that I've ever gone through, which was every single day you'd come to work and you would purposefully fail things. And then you'd react to that failure. Because we knew that we had no time to learn how to react to failure on E-Day. We knew that we had no time for the GOTV period for us to even think about what happens if a database disappears, what happens if this user clicks this button strangely, what happens if. We had no ifs, we had to know exactly. So we did this until we had enough of a handle on execution that we did not have any worries and there were no surprises. The first time we did this, or not the first time, but one of the big times we did this was a Sunday. And the next day, Amazon went down very, very, very hard and took most of the internet with it. And that day, I think it was October 21st, anyone remember? It was the day of the last debate, which was not a great day to have a lot of downtime. But we didn't have any downtime because we had just practiced for 12 hours the previous day on what to do in exactly that scenario. So we just reacted and it was no big deal, and our users didn't notice, which is the most important thing. On E-Day, E-Day was hilarious. This was an actual Post-it note that was on someone's desk. And so I'm like walking around and I see this and I'm just like, yeah, we should calm the fuck down. So on E-Day, because we're done, you cannot, it's not like we're gonna build. So we just sat in my office and listened to R&B and waited for fires. And there were no fires because everything that we had practiced worked. So every reaction was the actual perfect reaction. There wasn't actually something that was surprising. The only problem we had, hilariously, was with our favorite app, Ushahidi, which we had a huge implementation of and we used for voter protection and made the difference in places like Virginia and some other places where voter protection was very important. And it almost crashed, but it didn't. So we won. That was very exciting. This would be a really different presentation if it would have gone the other way. It might be an interesting execution to try it. So, takeaways. I wanted to open it up to some questions and some discussion, but I wanted to give you guys some of the things that really made me think about, or that I thought about during the election. The first thing that I think the innovation that we had was the team. It was hiring. It was getting real engineers inside of a campaign to do engineering. And that goes for not just engineers, but it goes for the analytics folk, and it goes for the IT folk, and it goes for the media analyst people. All of these people came and interrupted their careers to join. The technology and the solutions and the code we wrote was innovative, but that wasn't the innovation. This is something that's really frustrating. The campaign needed to represent America, and we weren't able to do that inside of the engineering team. I was able to talk to huge organizations that are trying to hire non-Asian minorities into technology organizations and women into technology organizations, and they were not able to help us. And when you have the president's name, you can pretty much get whatever you want, and they were not able to help us. So that kind of demonstrated to me, which was, before that I was like, fuck it, I'm making t-shirts, I don't really care. Now, I'm like, okay, we have to do this, and it was impossible. We did not do a good job. Well, we did a great job. I mean, we won. We can go back to that slide. We can be like, well, okay, well, what does it matter? But going forward, you know, I really truly believe that innovation comes from diversity. And, you know, we need diversity on our teams to survive. So I need you guys to help with this, and I think one of the first things we can do is just continue talking about it. And not just yelling, change the ratio, but actually doing things. Politics does that even make sense? Politics does not like change at all. Me hired as a change agent, as someone who I think looks different, and I think that's part of one of the reasons I was hired, because I could be a change agent visually as much as I would like execution-wise. It was hard. So this is something we can all kind of think about, and I'm sure you deal with this, especially the people that deal with giant organizations that are old. Anything that's been around for a while, they don't like change, and politics is one of them, and it was a pain in the ass. And you don't have to wear a suit. That was something I did not believe, but apparently you don't. So yeah. This was a gift that was made one of the times the president came and visited, so I thought I'd share this. And that's it. So I'd love to hear some questions, and really I'll answer anything to the best of my ability. So if there's any just questions about generally the campaign or technology or why I'm so good looking. Yeah. Yeah, so if it's something that I can't answer, I'll probably just say I can't answer that, or probably try and be funny. In the back.
I was just wondering if you could talk more about practices of failure and sort of what that was like for your team, and like, giving your comments on how endemic, like, iterativeness is to startup culture.
So the question is talking more about practicing failure and iterative startup culture. Campaigns do not like iteration. They are very used to technology being launched or shipped one time. And so they would say, okay, when is it going to be done? And you would say, it's going to be done on the 1st. And they would say, okay. And then on the 1st, if it didn't fulfill what it needed to do, they just kind of throw it away and be like, once again, technology has fucked us, which is the thread of a lot of technology and campaigns. It's a very difficult thing. And I think it's just because all of us who do technology, we're used to saying, oh, well, it did launch on the 1st, but it also launched on the 2nd and the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th and the 6th, all through however many days you have. And so we launched very early with some of our products specifically to get them out, because we knew that, almost as a little bit of a culture virus about iteration, that we knew that once it was out there, they had to react to it. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with users, but they're all motherfuckers. And they react much differently to software when they actually see it than when they were telling you what they wanted. And so we would often get these specs that were basically, this is what we want, we would build it, and then they would just say, that isn't actually what we wanted this other thing, which I'm sure happens every single day to all of us all the time. And so we just released early, we released often, we did a lot of conversations about what we were trying to build. The only thing that we could do to solve any of these problems was just ship. Any political problem we had, we could ship it away. If we shipped good software, it would disappear. So now on the practice failing part, all we did was made sure that I'll just tell you how we did it. So we just would create a menu of all the things that we were going to test. We're going to test this without a database. We're going to test this without DNS. We're going to test this without our queues. Our servers are all going to disappear. And then we would just go through each of them. But Dylan Richard, who is my partner in crime in many of my projects, was a total punk, and he rearranged it. So he gave out the menu, and everyone was like, okay, this is the schedule for today. And then he just changed it. So there are really two schedules. They went through the one that they had, but then he was fucking with stuff on the back end that then they'd have to figure out what it was. And it was much like Dungeons and Dragons. So we'd sit in Campfire, and our DBA would be like, or one of our DevOps guys would be like, a DBA just dropped all the databases. What are you guys going to do? And then they would just be like, oh, fuck. And so they'd go and have to do it, and then he'd be like, Amazon just went down. And it was really funny. So these two guys basically played DM for our entire engineering team, practicing all these different scenarios. And there's this idea of tabletop exercises, which apparently is really popular to say in government. And I think they do it too. They don't just say it. And so when we said we're doing a game day, Jim Messina was like, call it a tabletop exercise. So I was like, we're going to do some tabletop exercises. And everyone was like, oh, that's very good. Yeah, it's a good idea. And so that was, and that was that. Yeah.
I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on how what you guys did compares and contrasts to like what the other side was doing, the Orca and all that.
Yeah, so a funny story about Orca is in 2008 we had an app called Houdini. Oh wait, so the question was how did what we did compare and contrast to what the other side did, and then Orca. Do you guys know what Orca is? Orca is not a narwhal. It is apparently the main predator of narwhals. It's the only natural predator of narwhals, which the Republicans talked about a lot before they lost. Anyway, so in 2008, there was an app that we built called Houdini, and Houdini went down and crashed and never came back up at 9 a.m. on Election Day. It was the app that was going to show us what was happening in our polling places and whether we were going to win or not. You know how we did win, so it was fine. But if we would have lost, I think the dialogue would have much been like Orca. And so this is a hard app. It's not the most difficult app in the world, but it's not an easy app. It's not something you can just kind of make quickly. And so in 2012, we had the same app, because you have to have this app for poll counting and tracking of people who are voting, and we called it Gordon because Gordon was the guy who killed Houdini, and we were like, fuck that dude. And so we had Gordon. Gordon worked, and then Orca was basically the Republicans' version of that. And so it's really interesting that it went down. It's the app that goes down, apparently, and it just sucks. So compare Orca, which is a very small app that everyone uses to count voters, to Narwhal, which is this giant concept idea of having an API for every piece of data and every interaction that you have, and a lot of business process management stuff in there. And we're just talking apples to oranges, but the press doesn't really care, and so they're just like, Narwhal killed Orca. And we're like, okay, well, it didn't help us. Yes?
So sort of trying to think, not just talking about, but I think there are some really concrete, actionable things that folks in this room can do. As an educator, this is one of my big issues. So do people realize that computer science isn't taught in most high schools anymore? And also that girls need permission to be dorks, unlike boys. So a girl who's interested in robotics will not join a robotics club, but will take a robotics class. And everyone who knows me as an educator knows I really am against coercive education, but there are times when having things in the formal curriculum really, really makes a difference in introducing kids who wouldn't otherwise take up a new interest into pursuing them. So there's this huge problem. There's this talk in the industry about this talent gap. There's this recognition, which I think you illustrated really, really vividly. And there's something really concrete we can do. The schools don't have teachers who will teach computer science in school because engineers make way too much money in the industry. But there's something to really ask ourselves as industry professionals, that we're also responsible for the training of the new generation.
Thank you.
Going back to your politics doesn't like change slide, one of the things sometime over the last 2 days I heard you were remarked that it was really important to move a bunch of what was happening outside of Washington. And I wonder if you could sort of reflect a little bit on that.
Outside the what?
Outside. The question is, it's important to move these things outside of Washington, and that's actually not my thought at all. I mean, it is. I believe it, but that's Barack Obama. So both of his campaigns were in Chicago, and that was specifically to be outside of the echo chamber and to be outside of where. I don't know this because I've only been to Washington D.C. like 48 hours in my life, but apparently it's a terrible place, and also they only care. It's a company town, right? So what they're worried about, what they're interested in, and it becomes this echo chamber of, oh my God, this is the most important thing, and it's actually not. And so we see this all over. We see this in Silicon Valley. That's about it, I guess. Hollywood, I suppose, although I haven't thought of it much. But I think it's important especially when you're trying to be innovative, to not go to the place where everyone else is doing the exact same thing. And so we did not want to. We were trying to not be Washington. We were trying to, re-elect a president that we thought was going to be a great president, not do what the wonks wanted us to do. And so if Playbook said something, we didn't really care. Now, that's not true. We obviously cared, but it wasn't that we were trying to just follow. And so Messina has said this a bunch, and he said he's much smarter than me on this topic, and I would definitely listen to him and what the president and Axelrod have said on this. But I think it's pretty telling that both Mitt Romney's campaign and our campaign were not in Washington. One more? Yeah. Okay.
Right back. Oh, that's right. That's great. Thanks a lot for being. And I'm Canadian, by the way. I was wondering, is your code base open source? And could you talk a little bit about the decision about how much transparency to put into code developed for a public campaign?
Yeah.
And that is sort of this quasi-public-private space?
So it's not quasi-public, it's private. So that's, I think, something that is a misnomer. There is nothing public about a campaign. It's a private company. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but legally the lawyers are like, whatever. Culturally? So I personally think that everything should be open source. And the reason I think that is because everyone else will fuck it up somehow. And it doesn't matter what organization you're talking about. We have purpose-built software for a presidential campaign. Like, the next time that will be used is in 4 years. So even if we have some organization that holds it, technology, like bit rot of 4 years is a lot. And so there's not going to be it's not going to be interesting in 4 years. And so I think if we open source it now, then all the people like us can take it and apply the little bits of technology to our organizations and say, oh, well, we don't necessarily need Narwhal, which has thousands of lines of code and hundreds of endpoints. We just need the thing that does voter registration or whatever. And then using that and pushing that to the organizations that we think are important. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with the code. I'm waiting to find out, and I'll probably find out through C-SPAN more so than I'll find out through my organization, because that's how it works, apparently. Not that I'm bitter. What I am excited about, and this is the question that everyone asks, is won't the Republicans have it as well? And I think that's a really interesting question, because I'm not sure if you remember, but the Republicans hate women. And so since they hate women, they're still going to fuck up technology. Until they get a reasonable candidate, and that reasonable candidate is able to be reasonable, it doesn't matter what technology they use. They outspent the shit out of us, and they put crazy ads up all over, and the people were like, let's landslide him. And so I think it's very telling that the resources don't matter as much as the actual candidate, and that gave me a lot of hope. Now, with that said, I still think open source. I think that's the only option. That's not going to work. They're not going to do that, though. I can go do this all day, so if anyone wants to just, we can go talk somewhere.
All right. Thank you very much, Harper.